Tyranny, revolt, deception, a cry for help that went unheard, and dragons lurking in the dark. Pokémon Scarlet is darker than you thought, so let's talk about it. Hey everyone, it's Charles. How are you today? Pokémon Scarlet and Violet has one of the better and one of the darker stories in the Pokémon series. The quality of the writing isn't exactly 100 Years of Solitude or even Final Fantasy VII, but the narrative clearly stands head and shoulders above Randy's latest fanfiction with its focus on bitter themes that have surprisingly little to do with villainous schemes, the enslavement of legendary Pokémon to end the world, or big bad men with big bad volume. And surprisingly everything to do with bullying, abuse, deceit, death, and individuals simply doing their best to trudge across the peaks and valleys of everyday life. Sure, Victory Road is basically just a warning not to let freaky ladies know where you live, but Path of Legends and The Way Home have made waves in the fandom, and so has Starfall Street. Of course, the tragedy of Team Star isn't an obvious catastrophe on the scale of The Way Home, but the story actually grapples with an even more malevolent brand of evil that poisons society at every level when left unchecked, eventually destroying individuals, families, and society itself. It is much darker than people think. So the plan today is to peel back the layers of darkness and shine a light on the pain, the sorrow, and the optimistic takeaways underpinning the fall of Team Star. And as always, it's going to be a good time, so kindly subscribe to hop in for the ride. And before we jump right in, don't forget to check out my online classes about making life more fulfilling, purging your inner darkness, and smashing out home runs in the game of life with a free trial over on Skillshare. Skillshare is known for its photography, film, and illustration classes, but it has also become a training ground for creatives who want to reinvent their goals, their careers, and themselves. As someone who is 100% self-employed, I've personally used Skillshare for years to boost my creative abilities, and for anyone looking at building a YouTube channel as a full-time job or even just for the fun of it, be sure to use my free Skillshare trial link in the video description to take Enrico Luzzi's DIY video production for content creators from setting up to editing, as Enrico hits all the video making fundamentals and will have you cracking out videos in just over an hour. And whether you are interested in YouTubing, pixel art, game development, manga drawing, or something else altogether, you're bound to find a class about it on Skillshare. Not to mention that you can enjoy unlimited classes from the Skillshare library for free, since the first 1,000 people to use my link will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. So snag the trial, best of luck with your goals in 2023, and with that said, let's dive right into today's chat. P.S. I would really love it if you did join my self-transformation community over on Skillshare, so if you're interested, I'll see you there. Starfall Street, or should we say, Stargate Street. In short, it's a story about supposed hooligans on the wrong side of history and the dragons that emerge from the darkness when evil and ignorance run rampant. In long, the story goes like this. Shortly after we enroll at the academy and begin our treasure hunt project, we come across Todoroki's lost sister getting harassed by delinquents in front of the staircase leading up to the academy. After crushing them, seeing them driven before us, and hearing the lamentation of their strudels, the Colgate girl thanks us for our help before beaming out, and our friend, even if we don't want to be friends, Nimona, explains that those delinquents hail from Team Star, an organization of troubled students who skip class and disrupt the lives of students and teachers alike at the academy. Later, we receive a call from CASSIOPEIA, an unknown person who claims to share some history with Team Star, and who wants to bring the rogue organization down, for some reason, by having us defeat the 5 Team Star bosses at 5 squad bases scattered around the Paldean countryside. Apparently, it is written into Team Star's organizational code that if a boss is challenged to a battle, they have no choice but to accept that challenge, and if they lose, they have to step down from their leadership role. So theoretically, if we defeat all 5 bosses, the emergent leadership vacuum will cause the entire outfit to crumble. Disbanding a mafia-like group of bullies sounds like a pretty hip cause to get behind, so we join the mysterious CASSIOPEIA's mission, and Operation Starfall Street is set into motion. Shortly after, a somewhat familiar-looking student named Clive joins our mission in order to settle his own unfinished business with Team Star, and CASSIOPEIA throws the first stone by sending out a declaration of war to the Team Star bases. It's obvious that both Clive and CASSIOPEIA have a very personal stake in the outcome of Operation Starfall Street, and nestled in Clive's unfinished business and CASSIOPEIA's history with Team Star is a tale of tyranny, revolt, and deception worth a headline. Well, in due course we began touring Paldea to take down the Team Star squad bosses, the supposed big bullies of Paldea, one by one. Mela of the Shedder Squad, Giacomo of the Segan Squad, Atticus of the Navi Squad, Ortega of the Ruckbaugh Squad, and Eri of the Calf Squad. Shedder, Segan, Navi, Ruckbaugh, Calf. Curiously enough, these 5 squad names are the same names given to the 5 most lustrous stars in a particular constellation. A constellation named after a vanity-stricken queen whose arrogance brought ruin upon her kingdom and saw her eternally chained to a celestial throne as punishment. So if the connection between Cassiopeia and Team Star was not obvious enough already, the strong allusion to Greek mythology might make one give some thought to why exactly the queen of the constellation is set on destroying it. Over the course of the Starfall Street saga, as we snuff out one star after the other, we discovered that the supposed big bullies of Paldea aren't exactly the big bullies that everyone makes them out to be. They may be heading up a disruptive mob, they may be unwittingly crippling the futures of their followers, and they may have questionable fashion sense. But as it turns out, the Academy's apparent bullies only became bullies because they were once victims of bullying themselves, and each of them has a tale to tell. Giacomo had been elected as the student council president, but his stiff rules quickly saw him ousted, ostracized, and humiliated by the student body. Mela was bullied by jealous girls at the academy for being the hot girl in class, to the point at which she warped her own personality and appearance to keep the nasties at bay. But she's still beautiful, if you ask me. Ortega, the fairy-loving fellow with fabulous fashion and the heir to a massive apparel company, was likely bullied by muggles who simply hate the rich, the small, the swagger, and the color pink. Eri, the wrestling mask girl, had the misfortune of becoming more popular with her peers than the former class queen Carmen, to which Carmen responded by ruining her athletic, hardworking, and talented peer's life with a vicious smear campaign, only to suffer the same fate when her fickle friends turned their attention to her instead. And lastly, we have Atticus, the weeb who thinks he descended from ninjas, who was bullied for living every day like a Sunday afternoon at Bicolin. Indeed, some time ago, each of the bosses was shunned, humiliated, and picked on for shining brightly in their own way. The picture-perfect student lives they'd envisioned turned out to be nothing more than a lie. Their time at the academy must have devolved into a waking nightmare, and it was in the midst of this nightmare that a queen would emerge to turn them into stars. As we soon find out, Team Star was only formed about a year and a half before we ourselves enrolled at the academy, back when the 5 stars and the queen who unified them, all of whom had been viciously bullied for their idiosyncrasies, found strength in camaraderie in themselves and pushed back against the darkness by launching a unified rebellion called Operation Star to exact vengeance on their aggressors. It's an inspiring story. Unfortunately, as Fabulous Fred once said, he who fights monsters should see to it that he himself does not become a monster. Indeed, victims fueled by fire and fury can very easily become victimizers themselves as soon as they take a position of power. And while the Team Star members consistently assert their innocence, the uncomfortable overreach of their crusade is difficult to ignore. In short, they declared war on their bullies in a full-on confrontation backed by menacing war machines. All of their bullies were intimidated into dropping out of the academy, hurting their future prospects as well as the future prospects of their families. The former director and the entire former faculty were left with little choice but to resign. Team Star went on to become a disturbance to the new director, the new faculty, and all of their peers at the academy. We saw with our own eyes how their recruitment quota encourages the harassment of other students, and their offensive spilled into the outside world as soon as they started blocking off roads across Paldea, inconveniencing citizens of the region who were completely disconnected from the conflict. Some of these happenings could be viewed as just or necessary, and it is true that Team Star's activities gave hope to many students who were also the victims of bullying. But the waters were muddied by the bleak consequences of their intimidation campaign, their aggressive recruitment process, and their empowerment of power-tripping bad actors. Another unfortunate byproduct of Operation Star was that the bosses and the squads thereafter found themselves unable to reintegrate with the same academy they had originally sought to thrive in, effectively hurting their own potential to grow and do good things in the world. We're told that the sudden disappearance of their queen, the big boss, was a key factor in Team Star's long-term truancy and inability to reintegrate, as the big boss was the one who kept the organization from devolving into a directionless mob. And with that said, re-enter Cassiopeia. If it hadn't been obvious enough from the constellation symbolism, or, well, it was pretty obvious, in the late game, Cassiopeia reveals that she is the missing big boss of Team Star. Apparently, she had recently returned to the scene from wherever she had been, and had been working from the shadows to unsue the seeds of chaos that she had planted a year and a half ago. Given that the Team Star code states that none of the bosses can give orders to the others, not even the big boss, she deemed that having us dismantle the organization one squad boss at a time by proxy was the best solution. And once we defeat all 5 bosses, she summons us to meet her in person in the Academy schoolyard. Shortly after we arrive, Cassiopeia wanders into the schoolyard under starlit skies, projecting what can only be described as cute Palpatine vibes. And before she throws light on the extent of the mess that we have been involved in, she completes a double identity disclosure by revealing her true identity, an identity not even known to the bosses of Team Star. And that identity is Penny, the girl we had defended from Team Star at the beginning of the game, who periodically reappeared as a supply unit member working for the nebulous Cassiopeia. It wasn't exactly a pants pooper plot twist, but at last we could get the full scoop on the saga of Team Star. Like the other Team Star bigwigs, Penny had been tormented by bullies under the former Academy administration, and neither the other students at the Academy nor the Academy's former faculty did anything to stop the bullying, which understandably disgusted Penny. So one day, she decided to do something about it herself, and thus, while keeping her identity a secret, she interfaced with the 5 stars exclusively by phone to build an organization of misfits, the 5 bases, and a campaign to intimidate their aggressors into submission. Ironically, by way of the aggressive dropout-inducing declaration of war against the bullies, the would-be freedom fighters would actually sacrifice exactly what it was they had set out to reclaim, as every member of Team Star was immediately placed in the crosshairs of academic expulsion. And just like that, the vision for a new kingdom of the Queen and her 5 stars was on the verge of ruin. Desperate to prevent her friend's expulsion, Penny contacted Academy Director Harrington to shoulder full responsibility for the situation, and Director Harrington sympathized with Team Star's motivations, deciding not to expel the organization's members, but to instead send Penny overseas for 18 months before himself resigning along with the entire faculty, shamed by his utter failure to address the situation. Meanwhile, since Penny hadn't informed the 5 stars that she had taken the fall for them, Team Star's now purposeless members holed themselves up in their bases to await the return of the big boss who could guide them forward. And given that the Academy had become the peaceful place it ought to be following the mass dropout of the bullies, the question of what to do about the Team Star problem was relegated to the back burner. That is, until Director Harrington's successor, Director Clavel, took office and threatened to expel Team Star's members for truancy, seemingly unaware of the full scope of the situation. For some reason. It was in the midst of this new threat to Team Star that we came full circle with Big Boss aka Cassiopeia aka Penny returning to Paldea, intending to force the group to disband so that everyone could return to school and live out the peaceful years that they had all fought so hard for. And here we were at the climax of Operation Starfall. But one had to wonder, why was Director Clavel so ignorant of the full scope of the Team Star fiasco that he initially jumped to expulsion as the best course of action? And why was he forced to go undercover to finally get a grasp on it? Wait, undercover? Yes, at the story's climax, Director Clavel reveals that the student Clive we had been interacting with all along during the Starfall Street saga was merely a persona he'd adopted to get closer to Team Star. What a brilliant disguise. As it turns out, the information gap that prompted Director Clavel's sleuthing to better understand the creation, intentions, and true nature of Team Star, as well as his ignorance of the initial crisis itself, were born out of truly catastrophic failures at the organizational level. Earlier in the story, when we first encounter ex-Director Harrington outside Ortega's base, he explains not only how he and the former faculty had taken responsibility for failing their students by resigning from their positions, but also that the truth of the situation had been illicitly concealed from the public and presumably from the subsequent administration. Indeed, at some point after the altercation that triggered the mass dropout, Harrington's deputy director erased all information on the incident from the Academy's records to protect his own reputation from the inevitable ramifications. Thereafter, Harrington fired him, but he didn't do much better himself, leaving sleeping dogs to rest as a new director and new faculty were brought in with no records of the situation to work with, and seemingly no handoff off report or face-to-face explanation to bring them up to date on what they were getting into. As such, after Penny's disappearance left the organization in turmoil, the new guard at the academy could only do their best to contend with the disgruntled squads within and beyond the walls, while Director Clavel struggled to piece together Team Star's side of the story, unnecessarily prolonging the predicament for 18 months. Basically, the old academy was an organization that allowed evil acts to proliferate unchecked within its walls, birthing the dragons that would one day destroy it, and leaving someone else to fight the dragons without a sword. Indeed, it was only because Penny returned and thrust us into action that Team Star could finally be roped in, and that Director Clavel could get a firm enough grasp of the situation to lift his threat of expulsion, after which he initiated work to thaw relations between Team Star and the new academy, and to help Team Star's members reintegrate with their peers and at last live out the carefree student lives that they had always dreamed of, beginning with some good old community service. In the real world, unchecked bullying begins in the schoolyard but soon begins tearing at the very fabric of society, as victims are robbed of their potential or transformed into abusers themselves, as families struggle to deal with or even lose people dear to them, as entire organizations become poisonous places to be. And just like that, society becomes more and more torn up, more and more warped, as tyrannical dragons run rampant. In the case of the Team Star fiasco, the dragons were able to begin growing and growing and growing some more, when the victims' cries for help went unheard. And those unheard cries echoed throughout the academy and then out into the world as Team Star lashed back at their aggressors, lost sight of their purpose, and soon became a headless dragon themselves. As such, the metaphorical kingdom of Cassiopeia itself was ravaged as Team Star overreached their noble cause to drive students out of school, to coercively recruit members, to become a nuisance to people around Paldea, and to put the pedal to the metal towards their own expulsion from the academy. Halfway rooted in rumors or not, their image became associated with obstruction and intimidation, and it was not until various stakeholders shared responsibility for the full scope of the situation and took action that the saga was at long last brought to a peaceful conclusion. At the end of the day, the Starfall Street storyline plays out kind of like a ham-fisted PSA because essentially it is a ham-fisted PSA, but the parable does provide important food for thought, and implicitly a handful of tips that may be helpful to anyone getting bullied. Obviously there's a lot of nuance to every situation, but I think that these juicy nuggets of advice are probably helpful in most, and just good in general for happy living. Anyways, at the end of Starfall Street, Team Star is able to reintegrate with the academy and are even given a positive outlet through which to use the strengths they built up to get through the bad times to make the academy a better place for everyone. The first generation bullies never do get a shot at redemption, but otherwise it's an optimistic ending to a story that's darker and more real than people seem to give it credit for, with a core message that is relevant to everyone: that bullying creates a vicious cycle, that it quickly becomes a difficult problem everyone has to solve together, and that an honest cry for help should never be ignored. But what do you think about the tale of Team Star, about its founder, and about solutions to bullying in the real world? I'm curious what you think, and as always, let's chat.